Hi, if I ask a JavaScript developer that what would be the output of line number 18, look at my screen, and if you are able to answer that confidently without guessing, it means you have a fair bit of understanding about this in JavaScript. Yes, very popular THIS, this in JavaScript. You know, in JavaScript, every function has its own this object, but one type of function. I repeat, every function has its own this object, but one type of function. So in JavaScript, you can create a function in 4 ways. Keep that in mind before you go start answering that question. That in JavaScript, a function can be created in 4 ways. When you create a function as a statement, or when you create a function as an expression. Now, if you do not know what is function statement and function expression, then first you should go and find out what is that before coming and watching the video to calculate value of this. So when you create a function as a statement, when you create a function as an expression, or when you create a function using function constructor, in all these 3 types of function, there is a formula to find out that what would be the value of this at any given time. And I'm going to give you that formula. There are 4 formulas you need to keep in mind whenever you are working with function statement or function expression, or you created a function using function constructor, that what would be the value of this inside that function. 4th way of creating a function, or 4th types of function, is called also known as arrow function. And for arrow function, behavior of this is little different, and we are not going to cover that in this video, but probably we would create some another video on that. Keep in mind that arrow function became part of JavaScript in ES6, means much later. ES6 means in 2015, and functions, other types of functions, and this is part of JavaScript from very beginning. So how arrow function deals with this object, and what is the relationship between arrow function and this object is entirely different than what is relationship between this object and other 3 types of function. So I told you so far that in JavaScript every function has its own this object. Statement number 1. Statement number 2, I told you that JavaScript, you can create a function in 4 ways, or there are 4 types of function. Out of those 4 types, 3 types of function has the same formula which you can apply to calculate value of this. However, arrow function does not have its own this object, and it has different type or different ways of finding value of this inside that. All right, so far so good. Now please look at the screen. Think what would be the output. We would come to this in a bit, but let me go ahead and comment this code, and I write a function foo here, and then I say that, hey, print me value of this. Pretty simple. So here I have created a function foo, and when you create a function like this, that is called function statement, and then I'm printing value of this. Now if I ask you that, hey, what would be the value of line number, what JavaScript would print for line number 21, what would be your answer? Let's say that you are giving an interview and your interviewer is asking that question. Now it may come to you just that, hey, I told you that, okay, in JavaScript functions are of 4 types, and 3 types has its own way of calculating value of this. So this function foo is a function statement, so it would have some value of this, and you would start guessing, and you would start giving me answer of that. And if you start giving me answer of line number 21, I would not assume, I would be very sure that you do not know JavaScript enough. In this world, no one can say that what would be the value of this for line number 21. You know why? Because I give you background that there are 4 types of functions, but what would be value of this inside a function does not depend on that how you have created that function. I repeat, it does not depend on how you have created that function. It does not depend on the type of function. It depends on how you are calling that function. And since On your screen, there is no code which is showing that how you are calling that function foo. In this world, no one can say that what would be the output of line number 21. Keep in mind that value of this depends on that how you are calling that function. It does not depend on how you have created that function. This is very important distinction you need to keep in mind. That in JavaScript, value of this inside a function depends on how you call that function. It does not depend on that what would be how you have created that function. And I give you a little demo on that. So let's say that I go here and I call that function foo right here, and so I call that function foo, and you see that I'm getting some output. I would come to this output in a bit. But if I go here and I call this function like this, and again save, and if I come here and again call this, you see I'm getting entirely different output, right? When I call that function without new, it had different output. It was printing different value of this. When I call that using new, it is printing different value for this. So in JavaScript, value of this inside a function depends on how you are calling that function. It does not depend on how you have created that function. This is very important distinction you need to keep in mind. Okay, so in how many ways a function can be called, in how many ways a function can be executed. Let's see that. So in JavaScript, you can call a function in 4 ways. A JavaScript function can be called in 4 ways. That is also known as invocation patterns. So a function can be called in 4 ways. You can call a function as a function. It sounds funny, right? Calling a function as a function. So if you call a function as a function, that is called function invocation pattern. And in function invocation pattern, value of this would be entirely different. When you call a function as a constructor, that is known as constructor invocation pattern. Again, the value of this should be entirely different. If you call a function as a method, that is called also known as method invocation pattern. And if you call a function indirectly, that is called indirect invocation pattern. So in JavaScript, a function can be called in 4 ways: function as a function as a constructor, function as a method, and calling function indirectly. So keep in mind that you need to know these 4 invocation patterns, and these 4 invocation patterns would give you 4 formulas to calculate value of this inside a function at any given time. So here I'll summarize before I go into the code that a function can be created in 4 ways for 3 types of functions: function statement, function expression, and function which is created using function constructor. Now no one creates that using function constructor, but for your knowledge, always how that function is called would determine that what would be the value of this inside that function. All right. However, for arrow function, that 4th type of function which got added in ES6, the love-hate relationship between arrow function and this object is entirely different than love-hate relationship between function statement, function expression, and this object. Good. So let's go one by one. Function as a function. So what I'm going to do here, let me go and create a function called, let's say that I have a product function on the top, but anyway, let me create this function product. And here in this function, I'm passing to parameters title and price. So here I'm saying this dot title equal to title, and this dot price equal to price. So here I'm assuming that this would represent some kind of object, and in JavaScript you can dynamically add properties to an object. We could cover that in different video. So here there is an object which is represented by that this, and then we are adding 2 properties, this and price, and we are assuming that this would actually represent that object which we are intended to represent, to add properties to. Never mind. So here we are, very simple function from line number 20 to 23. I hope everything is clear so far. Now let's go ahead and say var a equal to product. All right, and then pass pen and let's say 200. So what I have done, I'm calling that function product as a function. I'm calling that function as a function. When you call that function as you are calling in line number 25, that is equivalent to, that is also known as function invocation pattern. So when you call a function as a function, I'll print here the value of this. So here I'll say console.log and this. Okay, so when you call a function as a function in JavaScript, then always value of this inside the function would be the global object. When you call a function as a function, when you call a function as function invocation pattern, always value of this would be the global object. Right now, since I'm running this JavaScript in using Node.js, so here Node.js is representing me that Node.js global object, which you can see here, object global, and in the bottom you can see it has added two properties, title and price, to the global object. Now everyone in this Node.js which has access to this global object can have access to that title and price, which I did not intend to set on my global object. If you run this small simple code in browser, probably that global object is window object, and you would get printed window instead of this global object of Node.js. Alright, so when you call a function as a function, then it's called function invocation pattern, and the value of this inside that function is global object. Now this is very tricky. I'll show you something here. Let's say that I'm saying that, okay, I want to create a property named console. Be with me please on the screen, and I say that, hey, I'm a superb JavaScript developer, so I'll say this dot console equal to undefined, because I want to add a console property to an object which I want to create for my purpose. So I add a console property. JavaScript wouldn't complain about that, and then I set that value as undefined. And here I'm saying save it, and then I'm back here, try to run that code, and I see that what happens. Ooh, so JavaScript is now complaining that it's saying that, hey, cannot read property log of undefined. Interesting, right? Take 10 seconds and think what happened here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In JavaScript, value of this depends on how you are calling a function. It does not depend on how you created that function. Just summarizing for you. Got answer? No. Alright, so what happens here is that this console, which is printing for you, is actually part of the global object. But we, as a 10x JavaScript developer, we went ahead and we just overridden that, and we assigned undefined to that console. So of course undefined.log. Now JavaScript is trying to do that, and you are getting error because undefined.log doesn't make any sense. So you have to be very careful when you are working with function invocation pattern and adding some properties. That property would get added to your global object, and you may encounter this kind of problem. All right, so let's go back here. Function as a function, function invocation pattern. In function invocation pattern, value of this is global object. I hope you not forget that now, right? This was your formula number 1. All right, let's go here and I'm laughing because just like that. Anyway, so function product. Now I'm trying to call that function using new, means I'm trying to call that function as a constructor. So when I do that, when I call that as a constructor and run that, I'm getting that this is actually that newly created object. So when you call a function as a constructor, the value of this would be the newly created object. So in Constructor Invocation Pattern, there are two characteristics. First, always value of this would be newly created object, and return of your function would not make any sense. So if you say here return 9, JavaScript is going to ignore that, and always it would return you that newly created object. So that always you need to keep in mind. Now, which function you can call as a constructor, that is another important thing, and we may cover that in another video, but let me give you one glimpse of that. So in JavaScript, every function has one internal function. That internal function is called, and here I'm going a little bit deeper. Even if it is not making any sense to you, that is fine. It's about which function can be called as a constructor. So every function has internal property called construct. And if a function has that internal property construct, that function can be used to construct an object, or that function can be used as a constructor. So if I am a JavaScript function and if I have that internal construct property, you can call me as a constructor, and value of this inside me would be that newly created object. Let us say you, whoever is watching, take your name, and you are also a JavaScript function, but if you do not have that internal construct property, you cannot be called using new. You cannot be called as a constructor, and you cannot be used to create a new object. So functions which have that internal construct property are function statement, function expression, and function created using function constructor. But you are a function, you are a type of function in JavaScript, and you don't have that construct property, you cannot be called using new. So you are the arrow function. You are arrow function, I am not arrow function. All right. So if you call arrow function using new, JavaScript would complain about that. Don't trust me. Look at here. So I'm going to create a very simple arrow function here. I'm going to create a simple arrow function, and that arrow function says, let's say, return 9. All right. And here, if I try to call that arrow function, let's say let b equal to new a. All right, and save it and come back here. Little bit we are diverting from our agenda, but I guess this would be a good learning as well. So here you see that let b new a is not a constructor. Now you know why a is not a constructor, because it does not have that internal double square bracket construct method. Anyway, back to constructor invocation pattern. So constructor invocation pattern, when you call a function as a constructor, always value of this would be that newly created object. And what function returns does not matter. It is always going to return you that newly created object. So function invocation pattern, global object, constructor invocation pattern, newly created object. Two formulas so far: global object and newly created object. Good. All right, let's go to the third formula now. So whenever you have a function, all right, try to see how that function is called. And if that function is called like a function, always it is going to be a global object. If that function is called using new, always it is going to be that newly created object as the value of this inside that function. The other two, method invocation pattern. So what I'm going to do here, I'll come in this, and let's say that let's create one object called product, and we are creating object as object literal. Then again, object can be created in 4 ways: object literal, object using constructor as you just saw, and object using object.create, and object using class, which became part of JavaScript in ES6. So I'm here creating an object using object literal, so var product, and it has a title, and that title is pen, and then it has a price, and let's say that price is 1000, and then it has a display, and that is function. Okay. And inside that I'm saying console.log and print this. Alright, so I have a object product, and inside that there's a function display, so I can call that display as a method of product object. Now to call that display, of course, if I go here and call that display like this, JavaScript would complain about that because JavaScript doesn't know display in the global context. So if you try to do that, JavaScript will tell you that, hey, I do not know what is display, there is reference error. So you can call this display only with this object. You can, since that display is a method of object product, you can call it as a method. So you can call it as product dot display. Now JavaScript would not complain about that, and you are calling that display as a method. So here you see that value of this is the product object. So when you call a function as a method, always value of this is going to be that object which is before that dot. So here before dot object is product, so value of this would be product. Of course, let's say that if I have another object here called var and invoice, and that also has invoice number 1, and let's say that it has a honor, and this honor is, let's say, digit. All right, so if I do this invoice.display, JavaScript would complain about that because again invoice does not know about display. Display is internal to function product, to object product. So even though method invocation pattern tells you that, hey, you can that value of this would be the object which is before the dot, it restricts you to only use that object, which object function object, which is object for which that function is a method. So here you can only pass that product. But yeah, but in method invocation pattern, always it is going to be that object which is before that dot, or that object for which that function is a method. So that's method invocation pattern. For method invocation pattern, you would say that object before the dot. All right, so function invocation pattern global object, constructor invocation pattern newly created object, and method invocation pattern is object before dot. So far so good. Now you know these three formulas. Now let's go to the fourth one. Before going to the fourth one, try to understand here that in FIP, in CIP, in MIP, we as a developer are not controlling the value of this. It's JavaScript which is deciding that what would be the value of this inside the function. So in function invocation pattern, it is telling you that value of this would be the global object. In constructor invocation pattern, it tells you that value of this would be newly created object. And in method invocation pattern, it tells you that value of this would be the object which is before dot. And also that object should have access to that method. So in these three formulas, or in these three invocation patterns, we as a developer are not controlling that what would be the value of this, what could be the value, like how we can pass value of this. For that, you have that fourth way of calling a function called indirectly, and that is called indirect invocation pattern. So let's go here in the product. I want to pass this invoice as the value of this. So as you saw that if I do this invoice here and call this, JavaScript complains about that. So how I can do that? What will I do? I'll call this display function indirectly. So here I would say product dot display dot call or dot apply. So you can call a function indirectly using apply or call. If you use apply, then the extra parameters would be passed in an array. If you use call, then extra parameter would be passed in as a comma separated. What I mean by extra parameter means, like, let's say that if you have a extra parameter here, color and in stock. Okay, and here you say that this dot color equal to color and this dot in stock equal to in stock. All right, so when I use this apply, I can pass this parameter in an array. When I use dot call, I can pass in comma separated values. Now coming back to indirect invocation pattern. In indirect invocation pattern, we can manually pass value of this for the function. So here I'll say that, hey product, call display indirectly, but the value of this would be invoice. So always the first parameter would be the value of this you want to manually pass. So here I'm saying the value of this would be invoice, and then extra two parameter are optional. I can pass them, I cannot pass them. If I want to pass them, since I'm using call, I can pass them in a comma separated. So I'll say read and true. Okay, so I'm calling the display indirectly, and the first parameter is going to be the value of this, which I'm passing here, invoice. So now for line number 38, you should get an object where you have invoice number, honor, color, and in stock. Let's see that in action. So clear and node a.js, you have in here honor, color, in stock, and in stock true. So here you saw that you passed the value of this indirectly. This is also known as indirect invocation pattern. You can pass these two in an array if you are using apply. Only that is the difference, no other difference between call and apply. In call it is comma separated, in apply it is an array. But what call and apply does, it allows you to pass manually the value of this inside a function, and it is also known as indirect invocation pattern. So what indirect invocation pattern says, that it allows you to pass value of this manually. Alright, so function invocation pattern global object, constructor invocation pattern newly created object, method invocation pattern object before the dot, and indirect invocation pattern, it allows you to pass value of this manually. So these are the four formulas. And now here, let's go back to our code where we started. Let me go and comment all of them. And we started from here in the beginning, and I asked you that, do you know what would be the output? Now I'm sure you should be able to tell me what is the output. Function product, then you are setting a function, you are setting display function to the prototype of product. Now what is prototype? You would make another video on that, but just assume that you are adding a display function to product. And then you are saying console.log this, then you have another object mobile, and then you created an object p1. Now you are saying that p1.display. So inside this display, p1 is like current object, but you are using this p1.display. So this method invocation pattern you are doing, and then you are using indirect invocation pattern and then passing this mobile as a manually as the value of this. So now here if you run this node a.js, you see that you have title, iPhone, and price 1000 as the value of this for a product p1's display function. And here you saw constructor in line number 17, then p1.display method, and then .apply indirect invocation pattern. So calculating value of this is not tough. You just need to remember that for arrow function it is entirely different story, and we would cover that in next video. But for function statement, function expression, and if a function is created using function constructor, value of this depends on how that function is called. Now function can be called in four ways. Function calling as a function called function invocation pattern, value of this is global object. Function called as a constructor invocation pattern, value of this is newly created object. Function as a method invocation pattern, value of this is object before the dot. And function using apply or call indirect invocation pattern. Here the first parameter you can pass value of this manually as the first parameter of apply or call. Apply other parameters in an array, call other parameters as a comma separated. So now I hope you understand it. You need to practice it a little bit, and if you have any question on this video, please feel free to ask me on in the comment. So I hope you liked it. Thank you so much for watching it. Please share this video with your friends, and I hope to see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye bye.